They came to heal, not to fight, marked only by the blue helix, the universal sign of mercy. But when enemy forces opened fire on unarmed medics, humanity made a choice the galaxy would never forget. What happens when you target those who save lives? You awaken those willing to end them. New here, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and show your support by giving this video a thumbs up. Now, let's dive into this unforgettable story of compassion, betrayal, and the fire that followed. The sky above Aria 4 was painted with fire and smoke. Where once green valleys stretched under twin moons, only blackened soil and the ruins of shattered homes remained. From the command deck of the medical ship Celestis Dawn, Dr. Lena Vereen watched the destruction through the viewport, her heart heavy. The blue helix emblem on the ship's hull shimmered faintly in the harsh glare of the system's 3 suns, a universal symbol of mercy, neutrality, and healing. But today, as the dust of war rose across the horizon, she couldn't shake the feeling that their presence might not be welcomed as it once was. Lieutenant Jace Malden's voice cut through the silence. Distress signals from the surface are growing in number. Civilians report major casualties. Communications are fading. They're asking for immediate medical aid. He turned to Captain Saren Okoro, whose face remained calm, but stern. Saren gave a slow nod. Prepare for descent. Deploy all med teams, we answer every call. Within minutes, the crew of the Celestis Dawn moved into action. Gurneys were lined with fresh supplies. Medical drones were powered on. The shuttle bay buzzed with activity as doctors, nurses, and field medics suited up. Dr. Lena gathered her team, her voice clear and steady. We are going into an active zone, but remember, we are protected under Galactic Medical Accord. No side fires on medics. The blue helix still stands for peace. Let's make sure we carry that symbol with pride. As the ship descended into the scorched atmosphere, the world of Aria 4 came into sharp, tragic focus. Smoke coiled into the sky from cratered villages. A broken school roof teetered in the wind. And among the chaos, civilians, young and old, waited for help with what little hope they had left. The first shuttle touched down beside what had once been a community hall. Dr. Lena stepped into the ash-covered ground, her boots crunching debris. Set up triage here, she instructed. Her team responded instantly, unfolding portable medical pods, securing energy shields, and activating scanning units. It wasn't long before the injured began to arrive. A father carried his daughter, her legs badly burned. An old man stumbled forward with a makeshift sling tied around his bleeding arm, and behind them came more. Children sick from radiation exposure, families torn by falling debris, survivors who had walked miles through smoke and wreckage just to find the blue helix. Darlena moved from one patient to the next, her hands practiced and calm. Her voice remained gentle, her touch reassuring. You're safe now, she whispered to a crying child as she administered pain relief. Around her, the air was filled with the hum of machines, the quiet murmurs of nurses, and the occasional, distant boom of falling debris. The enemy, the Kranthi Dominion, had pulled back after the bombing, or so it was believed. The medics worked under the assumption that the danger had passed. But war rarely follows rules. Captain Okoro coordinated supply drops from the shuttle. Jace monitored radio chatter, adjusting frequencies to block static and interference. Signal strength is unstable, he warned, but no sign of further Kranthi movement nearby. By late afternoon, the field hospital had stabilized dozens of lives. Spirits lifted slightly as wounded children began to smile, and survivors started to believe the worst was over. Dr. Lena allowed herself a short breath of relief. Then the sky changed. It was a low hum at first, barely audible. Then came the sharp whine of engines cutting through the air, too fast, too deliberate to be friendly. Lieutenant Jace's voice came crackling through the comm. Dr. Vereen, we've got incoming. Unknown ships descending fast. Multiple heat signatures. She froze. Are they Kranthi? Unconfirmed. But they're not broadcasting any identification, and they're not slowing down. Within seconds, the first bolt of plasma struck the edge of the medical outpost. It exploded, in a burst of red light tearing through one of the portable clinics and sending debris flying. Screams filled the air. Lena threw herself over a wounded boy just before a second blast knocked out the triage tent behind her. "All units evacuate." Captain Okoro's voice roared across the comms. "This is not a drill. They're targeting the medical zone." More. Plasma fire rained down as black insect-like ships descended from the clouds, their wings gleaming in the sun. Doors opened, and armored soldiers poured out. Kranthi, without a doubt. Their armor was dark and angular, and they moved with brutal precision. One medic tried to wave the blue helix flag, shouting for a ceasefire. He was shot instantly. Dr. Lena crawled through the dust and chaos, her arms wrapped around the injured boy. She passed a burning shuttle, a fallen nurse, a shattered scanner unit. The medical equipment that once saved lives now lay in ruins. There was no negotiation, no mercy. The attackers weren't here to win a battle. They were here to wipe out those who healed. She managed to reach the backup shuttle, dragging the child behind her. With the help of another medic, she loaded him inside and slammed the hatch shut. The engines flared to life. As the shuttle rose, she looked out the side window and saw the field they had built in the morning now turned into a graveyard. Her heart ached, not just for the people they'd lost, but for what this meant. The laws they had trusted had been broken. The blue helix, once a shield, had become a target. Back aboard the Celestis Dawn, Captain Okoro stood at the observation deck watching as the shuttles returned, half of them damaged, several missing. "We were supposed to be protected," he said quietly. Dr. Lena sat next to the boy who had fallen asleep in her lap. She brushed a strand of ash from his hair. Her voice was steady but filled with fire. "They didn't just attack us. They attacked what we stand for." The silence that followed said everything, and so began the story that would spread across the stars, not of a battle, but of a betrayal. One that would awaken something the galaxy hadn't seen from humanity in generations. Not revenge, not hatred, but justice. A quiet promise born in ash and fire. This would not be forgotten. The smoke from the first attack had barely cleared when the second wave arrived. The blue helix banners, once a symbol of safety and protection, now fluttered weakly in the wind, torn and scorched. Dr. Lena Vereen could still hear the child's labored breathing beside her, tucked into the corner of the shuttle, his arms wrapped around a blood-stained blanket. She didn't have time to process her own fear. Too many others needed her strength. On the ground, chaos reigned. The temporary field hospital had been turned into a battlefield. The Kranthi soldiers had landed with terrifying speed and precision, and they weren't here to fight an army. They were here to eliminate the ones trying to heal. Medical pods were crushed under the weight of heavy boots. Supplies meant to treat burns and broken bones were stomped into the dirt. Everywhere Lena looked, there were signs of deliberate destruction. This was no accident, no misunderstanding. It was a message. In the distance, Captain Sarin Okoro stood beside the last operational command terminal, coordinating evac orders, while shielding two wounded technicians. His calm was still there, but the lines in his face were deeper now, his voice quieter, sharper. "Shuttles 2 and 4 are down. Priority is now on civilians. All medical crew fall back to Zone 3. Defend only if attacked." Dr. Lena heard the order through her earpiece as she crouched behind a piece of debris, using a portable scanner to check the vitals of an elderly colonist. The woman's eyes were closed, breathing shallow, pulse faint. There wasn't time to move her without help, and there was no help coming. "Just stay with me," Lena whispered, "just a little longer." Above her, the sky had darkened, not with weather but with ash. She looked up just in time to see Omar Kiss sprinting across the open field, holding a small child in his arms. Omar was a quiet field tech, a steady presence who rarely spoke unless spoken to. But in that moment he didn't need words. Plasma fire shot past him as he dodged burning debris, weaving through ruined tents. When he reached Lena, he handed her the child, unconscious, but alive. "You get her to the evac," he said, and without waiting for a reply, he turned and ran back toward the chaos. Darlena shouted after him, "Wait, we can go together." But Omar didn't look back. Moments later, the hill behind them erupted in light. The explosion lit up the battlefield for a few seconds, long enough to see his silhouette vanish in flame and smoke. The sound was deafening, the ground shook, and then it was gone. Just like him. Every medic, nurse, and volunteer knew what was happening now. They weren't just under fire. They were the target. The Kranthi had no interest in prisoners. They moved in lines, methodical, like machines programmed to erase every trace of kindness. 2 doctors were gunned down while lifting an injured mother. A nurse was dragged from behind a triage wall and executed. The medical transports clearly marked were shot out of the sky. The message was clear. Healers were no longer protected. Captain Okoro issued a direct order to abandon all equipment and evacuate what personnel remained. "This is not a rescue anymore," he said over the comm, voice flat. "This is survival." Lena carried the child through thick smoke, her uniform torn, the blue helix on her sleeve nearly burned away. The emergency shuttle was her only chance. Behind her, the sounds of battle blurred into a low, endless rumble. She didn't know if anyone else was coming. She didn't know who had survived. She just ran. As she neared the shuttle, she saw a movement. Another figure dragging a wounded colonist by the arm. It was Jace Malden, face bloodied, limping, but still moving. "We've got to go," he shouted, waving toward the shuttle. "We're out of time." They climbed aboard together, sealing the hatch just as another blast shook the ground. Through the window, Dr. Lena looked out at what used to be a safe zone. Only smoke and scorched earth remained. There were no banners now. No tents, no light, only a dark silence. Inside the shuttle, it was quiet, save for the soft beeping of medical monitors and the distant hum of the engines preparing for launch. A nurse gently placed a blanket over one of the children, whose breathing had slowed. Jace sank into a chair, head in his hands. Dr. Lena sat across from him, her arms wrapped around her knees, her scrubs torn, stained with blood and ash. "They knew who we were," she said softly. "They knew we were medics." Jace nodded. They didn't care. She looked down at her uniform, at the symbol that once gave her purpose. The blue helix. It used to mean something. He looked up at her, eyes tired. It still does. Just not to them. The shuttle lifted off, leaving behind the remains of the field hospital and the fallen. As it broke through the upper atmosphere, silence filled the cabin. No one spoke. No one needed to. The grief was too fresh, the rage too deep. Back aboard, the Celestis Dawn, Captain Okoro stood in front of a holoscreen showing the damage. Red markers indicated confirmed casualties. Names scrolled slowly, too many to process in one glance. He placed a hand against the glass. "We were there to heal," he whispered. Dr. Lena stood beside him, her voice calm but firm. "And we will again, but not until they understand what that symbol means, not until they remember what it stands for." The silence between them was filled with understanding. They had not gone to Aria 4 to fight. They had gone to save lives. But the world had changed, and now, something deeper had been set in motion. Something that would not be stopped by a ceasefire or a treaty. The galaxy had watched the flames rise. It had seen the smoke from the hospitals. It had witnessed what the Kranthi did to the ones who wore no weapons, who came only to heal. And it would remember. For now, though, the wounded needed care. The children needed hope. And the survivors needed to be reminded that even in the face of cruelty, the spirit to heal could still burn brighter than destruction. But just beneath that gentle light, something fierce was stirring, and it was waiting. The days that followed were quiet, but it was not the kind of peace that brought comfort. It was the silence that comes after something terrible has happened, a silence filled with grief, with questions, and with a calm that felt unnatural. Aboard the Celestis Dawn, the medical staff moved like shadows, treating the wounded with quiet hands and tired eyes. The smell of antiseptic and the soft hum of medical machines filled the corridors. No one played music. No one laughed. The memory of the attack on Aria 4 was too fresh, too sharp, and too hard to forget. Dr. Lena Vereen walked slowly down the hallway toward the recovery bay, where several of the injured children lay sleeping. The smallest among them, Silen, the boy she had carried from the wreckage, stirred in his bed. His face was pale but peaceful. He didn't remember much from that day, only fire, screams, and then her arms around him. Lena sat beside him, brushing a hand gently through his hair, grateful that at least one life had been saved. But for every child here, she remembered the ones they hadn't reached in time. Far from the quiet halls of the ship, the galaxy began to whisper. News of the attack on the medics spread quickly. Footage from scorched tents, broken medical drones, and burned-out ambulances found its way onto every known channel. Reporters called it a violation of galactic law, but to most who saw it, it was simply a massacre. It wasn't soldiers fighting soldiers. It was cruelty, targeted and deliberate. On the central world of the United Alliance, Admiral Nia Kestrel stood before a wall-sized screen showing news feeds from across human space. Her jaw was tight, her hands behind her back. Around her, the council chamber buzzed with quiet debate. Some wanted retaliation, others demanded sanctions, but Admiral Kestrel said nothing. She stared at the screen showing a burned medical pod, with the blue helix symbol melted halfway off the hull. For a moment, she closed her eyes. Then she turned to her staff. "Send the order," she said. "All medical ships are to withdraw from conflict zones immediately. No exceptions." Gasps echoed through the chamber. A diplomatic envoy stepped forward. "But Admiral, if we pull out our medics, what happens to the civilians caught in the crossfire?" "They'll have to fend for themselves," Kestrel said, her voice heavy. "Because if the galaxy won't protect those who protect life, then we will no longer risk ours." Within 72 hours, every human medical vessel disappeared from war-torn skies. Ships once seen as symbols of hope were recalled to safe orbit or reassigned to civilian zones far from combat. The blue helix was taken down, folded carefully and stored away. The galaxy noticed. War zones grew colder. Wounded soldiers from both sides cried out into silence, but no healers came. At first, the Kranthi Dominion celebrated. They released a statement declaring their attack a necessary military action and claimed the medics were coordinating intelligence from within humanitarian shelters. Most of the galaxy didn't believe it, but no one moved to stop them. Their soldiers laughed at the human withdrawal. Their leaders mocked the gesture. To them, it looked like fear. But not everyone was convinced that Earth had backed down. Deep in a secure orbital facility above the Alliance capital, preparations had already begun. It wasn't medics who filled the hangars now, it was fighters, carriers, and warships. Crews trained silently, moving like clockwork. Fleet technicians spoke in whispers. Pilots studied maps with furrowed brows. No grand speeches were made. No news feeds were invited. This was not about making a statement. This was about ensuring that those who attacked without remorse would never do so again. Back aboard the Celestis Dawn, Captain Sereno Coro entered the recovery bay to find Lena still sitting beside Silen. He spoke softly. "They sent the signal. Full recall has been completed." Lena nodded, her eyes never leaving the child. "We don't belong on the front anymore." "No," Saren said, "but someone else does." There was a pause between them. Then Lena turned to look at him. "Will it change anything?" He didn't answer right away. The galaxy only understands peace when it knows the cost of breaking it. Lena looked down at her hands, once steady in surgery, now trembling. "We came to save lives, Saren. That's all we wanted to do." "I know," he replied. "And we will again, but only when they learn that mercy isn't weakness, it's choice." Somewhere deep in Alliance territory, a fleet slowly emerged from hyperspace. These weren't hospital ships, these were warships, sleek, dark, and armed to the teeth. At their head was the Sovereign Light, command ship of Admiral Kestrel herself. It bore no blue helix, no symbol of compassion. It needed none. Inside, the command center, Kestrel stood in front of a group of officers. "The galaxy has been taught to ignore the laws of war," she said. "We are not here to remind them. We are here to make sure they never forget again." The officers saluted. The orders were clear. Lena stood in the viewing deck of the Celestis Dawn as the stars passed by slowly, silently. She wasn't part of the battle to come, not directly. Her role had always been to heal, to bring comfort, to carry hope into the darkest places. But even she understood now that sometimes healing required more than medicine. It required justice. Below her, Cylon slept soundly, unaware of the storm that was gathering beyond the stars. The Kranthi had mistaken kindness for weakness. They had believed that peacekeepers wouldn't fight back. They had thought that the blue helix was just a symbol. But symbols once broken become something else, something sharper, stronger, and far more dangerous when reforged. In the silence that followed the attack, a storm had begun to rise, and it was moving fast. The stars above the Kranthi Dominion's capital world shimmered like they always had, cold and distant, giving no warning of what was coming. Life below carried on as if the atrocities committed against the medics on Aria 4 were already forgotten. Soldiers walked the streets in parade uniform. Cities pulsed with light and motion. News broadcasts spoke proudly of their recent expansion and mocked the silence that followed Earth's withdrawal. The galaxy, it seemed, had moved on. But the Kranthi had misjudged that silence. It wasn't surrender. It was the quiet moment, before everything changed. From the blackness of space without warning, the first wave arrived. Hundreds of human warships dropped out of hyperspace in perfect formation. They didn't issue threats. They didn't respond to calls. They didn't explain themselves. The Sovereign Light, leading the fleet, activated a high-frequency transmission heard on every Kranthi channel. It was only one voice, Admiral Nia Kestrel, and it spoke with calm, undeniable clarity. "You killed our healers. You burned our hospitals. You shattered the shield of mercy we carried across the stars. And now, you will answer for it." Panic erupted across the Kranthi command network. Defense systems scrambled to power up. Generals issued orders in frantic bursts. Ships launched from hangars. But it was already too late. Earth's forces had come prepared. They had not come to negotiate. They had come to make a promise real, that those who fire upon mercy will find it gone when they need it most. The battle began with precision. Human warships moved with chilling efficiency, disabling enemy defense satellites, intercepting escape vessels, and cutting off communication relays. Each strike was targeted, deliberate. Civilians were not touched. No hospitals or schools were harmed. But every military outpost, weapons factory, and command center fell like collapsing towers. The Kranthi soldiers who once mocked the blue helix now faced ships that bore no emblem, only the quiet fury of a people who had been pushed too far. In the control room of the Sovereign Light, Admiral Kestrel stood surrounded by data streams and tactical reports. Her hands were steady, her eyes locked on the enemy fleet forming ahead. "Maintain pattern theta," she ordered. "Strike only confirmed military targets. Let them see the difference between power and cruelty." At her side, Lieutenant Calder, a young officer whose sister had been a nurse on Aria 4, watched the battle unfold with tight fists. "They thought we wouldn't come," he said softly. "They thought we'd forget." "They always do," Kestrel replied, "until we remind them." Back on the Celestis Dawn, docked safely on a neutral station, Dr. Lena Vereen sat with Cylon in the quiet of the observation lounge. News of the attack had reached even the outer systems, and the images were everywhere. Ships streaking across the skies, Kranthi fleets disintegrating in orbit, bunkers cracked open like empty shells. Lena didn't celebrate. There was no joy in vengeance, but she felt something else, something closer to peace. Cylon looked up at her with wide eyes. "Are the bad ones gone?" She paused, brushing a hand through his hair. "Some are, the rest are learning." Outside the window, a streak of light crossed the sky, a patrol vessel moving to join the main fleet. It shimmered against the blackness, silent and strong. It was not a symbol of revenge, but of protection. The Kranthi capital fell after just 6 hours. No reinforcements came. No allies answered their distress calls. The galaxy had seen what they did, and no one wanted to share their fate. When it was over, Admiral Kestrel opened a final channel to what remained of the Kranthi leadership. Her message was short. You thought compassion was weakness. You were wrong. Mercy is a gift, but it is never free. Now the galaxy remembers that. Then she gave the order. All forces withdrew. No cities were occupied, no territory was claimed. Earth had not come to conquer. They had come to end the lie that mercy could be attacked without consequence. Weeks later, Dr. Lena returned to Aria 4. The land was still scarred. The buildings were gone, but people had started to come back. Colonists who had fled were rebuilding homes. New medical tents were being raised. The blue helix flew again, bright against the dusty sky. She walked through the quiet memorial garden where her colleagues had once fought to save lives. White stones marked each name. Flowers had been placed there, some fresh, others worn by time. Silence stood beside her, now stronger, smiling up at her with hope in his eyes. Will the doctor stay this time? He asked. Lena looked up, watching a medical transport glide gently through the clouds. Yes, she said, because now the galaxy knows the cost of taking us for granted. In the end, the story of what happened spread not just through human space but far beyond. It was told in classrooms and council chambers, in history books and around dinner tables, not as a tale of war, but as a warning. The blue helix came to mean more than healing. It meant strength through compassion, courage through kindness, and a deep, unshakable vow. Those who dedicate their lives to saving others will never stand alone. And in the silence that followed the fire, the galaxy finally listened.